Hello, 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 and welcome to another edition of the Sunday Night SitDown. I am your host, Miracle Jones. We know a lot is happening. We're right, before the election, but there's so much stuff that is happening locally. So I think it's very important to have a very special guest representing the 7th District from Pittsburgh City Council. Welcome to the Sunday Night SitDown, Councilwoman Deb Gross.
Thank you. Very happy to be here. Appreciate it.
Yes, we're very excited for you to join us. I know it's been a very, very busy few weeks for you. Can you just talk a little bit about what inspired you to run for office and what do you like about City Council?
So it turns out I've always been passionate about the issues that are local government issues. I didn't realize that when I was younger and earlier in my career. But I was always working on issues around housing, around neighborhoods, about how to kind of make people connect with each other. And, I didn't know to call it organizing at first, but like getting people to work on projects and convening people. And it turns out that's pretty much what local government is about, right? And so I was in my late 40s, when my city council person quit. But I had been in the years before that working with lots of the neighborhood organizations that are in the city council district. They were just like near where I lived, helping them write grants to improve the neighborhoods, working on their volunteer outreach, getting them organized, kind of doing programs with organizations like Bloomfield-Garfield Corporation, Friendship Development Group, the Lawrenceville Corporation, and even like in Bloomfield, the Bloomfield Development Corporation. And so I knew the people doing the work in the neighborhoods, and I knew a lot of the neighbors. And then like I said, Councilman Dowd was the councilman before me, and he quit in the summer of 2013. And so then there had to be a special election.
So since winning special election, what are some of the changes that you have seen as a result of the work of council?
It's been really, really big change for the neighborhoods I represent. Most of the people know this. So the district includes the Strip District, all of Lawrenceville, all of Bloomfield, Polish Hill, Stanton Heights, Morningside, Highland Park, Friendship. I don't want to miss any. And from today compared to 2013 is just all about the real estate pressure, the increases in rent and the increasing in housing affordability. But even in the summer and fall of 2013, when I was knocking on the doors, like it hadn't really hit. And so all of the neighborhood and all of the organizers and what was on the minds of residents, it's kind of hard to believe. But at that time, it was, well, how do we kind of get development in the neighborhood? People were still worried about blight and abandonment. In District 7 and the neighborhoods I represent, vacant and abandoned properties were still seen as like a problem, that we needed to do something about. There's not a single vacant or abandoned property left right now, right? A property without a house on it right now, if you go on Zillow or realestate.com or whatever it is, you can find, like, say, a patch of grass in Bloomfield. It's probably 25 feet, maybe even like 20 feet by like 90 feet. It's selling for $100,000, like a piece of property without a house on it. And so what really just turned the corner so fast in the first year or two, like let's say 2014, by 2015, I remember a day in the fall of 2015 where I got a call from the leadership in Lawrenceville, and they were like, we want to come down like today, like you just clear your afternoon schedule. We're coming in to your office now. And we have an affordable housing crisis. Like, this is a crisis, and like, we're freaking out. We want to figure out what to do about it. And it was kind of then that we hatched the idea to do a policy just for Lawrenceville, because it wasn't other neighborhoods were facing the kind of really intense, developer after developer after developer, just like, invading the neighborhood. So that's been a real change, and I want to give credit where it's due. Councilman Lavelle launched the Affordable Housing Task Force kind of, and I think maybe it was in the beginning of 2015. But still, I don't think we understood at that time that affordable housing is a problem for both the neighborhoods facing abandonment and disinvestment and the neighborhoods facing like hyper investment and gentrification. And that we needed almost like two sets of policies to work on the two, what I like to call like the market extremes on both ends, underinvestment and hyperinvestment, right? And that and it's, I think, is our rightful role as the local government to work to like moderate both of the kind of market extremes. And so I don't think any of us understood that in 2013, 2014.
I think it's interesting to see how things change so much. And we know where it's a fast-paced society. You talk about people coming down to your office. How do you learn about issues? And how do you choose what issues to advocate on? You're just one person. You can't, write policy every single time. So how does that thought process work for your office?
Yeah, I mean, this is local government, right? I mean, people like stop you on the sidewalk and grab you at the grocery store and know where to find you. They know where you live. They know, we're accessible. I think it's a really good thing that Pittsburgh City Council has at least a small budget for full-time staff. So I have 3 full-time people in my office. There's always someone to answer the phone. Certainly, on social media, we're available. So people know how to find you there and bring their issues forward. It's also, I always like to remind people that City Council is in session Tuesdays and Wednesdays, usually every week of our lives, except the 3 weeks in August. And that's because that's not true of other bodies of government. Like county councils once a month, generally when there's a public meeting, but we're in public Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And there's public comment at the beginning every time. Every time. And you can call in now on Zoom, which makes it so much more accessible. Not perfectly accessible, but a lot better than having to like take off work and come down physically and sit in chambers for you don't know how long until we get to you. And that's, I think, really important for people to utilize. But it's more than that, right? I'm fortunate in the neighborhoods I represent to have either volunteer groups or even staffed organizations that are constantly on the ground listening to residents and formulating problems and analyzing problems and formulating solutions. And we work constantly with community groups. So there's like individual citizens, and then there's the kind of organized groups of citizens that represent neighborhoods. But then also in Pittsburgh, we're really fortunate to have a really big organized advocacy community, right? And so they're kind of listening across the city and are maybe hearing directly from residents that I'm not directly hearing from because I'm talking to the residents in my city council district. So I think, to sound maybe idealistic, there's a really active conversation all the time. And in its best days, it's almost like co-governance, right? Because these are groups that are, again, seeing problems that we might not necessarily have our eyes on, because we have to have our eyes on so many things, are able to craft and get kind of a coherent understanding of problems that they're really good at bringing forward to us so that we can understand them, and then working on policy together. Paid sick leave, inclusionary zoning, hopefully rental registry, lots of things that have the potential to make big changes in the city have really had so many citizens at the table. So I really appreciate that. That's a nice thing I think about local government.
Yeah, I think that is very interesting because sometimes I think people get frustrated with public comments. So I really think it's great that you're talking about how transparent and accessible the city council is. Like I said, I know you have like a lot of things, going on, right now, especially with the housing. What has been some of the challenges with city council, because like you said, you're in session 2 days a week. There are a lot of issues, impacting the city, and you know things you may have ran for council for one reason and you have to deal with a different issue. Like, what are some of the challenges and bright spots that you believe for city council?
We do always keep lines of communication open on this council with these council members, even if we're not happy with each other, even if we really there are issues that we have radically different opinions on. We can usually compartmentalize that and then work together on the next issue, right? We may never come to agreement on issue A, but then we can work together on issue B. So I do hope that people realize that, because we all get frustrated with other bodies of government that are polarized and not working constructively together. But we're more like a dysfunctional family, you know. We still sit down at the table with each other twice a week and we work through things. So that I do want people to realize that there's always hope. But part of the limitations of city government is that we are kind of at the bottom of the pecking order of governments, right? And so things like gun control, we get preempted by our state government, right? Things like trying to do a rental registry, which I literally just got an earful last night out in the community from a citizen who just kind of overheard my conversation with a colleague and wanted to tell me how bad landlords are such a problem, that apartments, are in terrible condition, they're substandard. Renters are afraid to speak out about the problems, even if their kitchen ceiling has fallen down, because landlords just evict them. And we've had a good policy for 15 years. We've passed it 2, maybe even 3 times, and we were rental registry, right, where we are asserting our authority as a city to go out and inspect every single one of those properties, and that landlords have to register their apartments, because right now that's not true. Landlords, we don't know necessarily where all the apartments are, and so we're not proactively preventing those kitchen ceilings from falling down and giving citations to those landlords and preventing them from evicting their renters. We could do all of that. But lobbyists tied it up in court, in the state courts, for 15 years now, right? It got all the way, we had to spend your taxpayer money at fighting it at every level of court, all the way up to the PA Supreme Court. And we won. And we still don't have it rolled out. We were supposed to roll it out in May, but lobbyists took it and challenged, filed an injunction again. We're confident we're going to get that through. But how many lives could have been easier if we'd have started inspecting those apartments 15 years ago, protecting both the health of the renters' kind of living situation, health-wise, and preventing them from eviction. So that's frustrating.
Yeah, and I think that it really goes to show why government is so important, like you said, at every level. And you're talking about the limitations. There has been this ongoing conversation about race and equity. What is some of the things that city council can do to address those disparities? And what, again, is some of those limitations? Because I know that there was the opportunity to do the paying people, and then there was the threat of litigation saying you can't do it, that's discriminatory. So can you just talk, a little bit about some of the ways that city council is trying to address inequities, some of the things that you can't do?
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, we can't do everything because we can't print money like the way the federal government does, right? So we only are taking so much money out of people's pockets to put in the big pot to then spend it out. And you really have to weigh that, because sure, we could tax more and we'd have a bigger pot of money, but that's not equitable, right? The ways in which we're allowed to tax. Here's a really good example. And I know this is really in the weeds, but still, it's, I think, helpful for people to understand that it would be really great if the city of Pittsburgh could not tax houses that are, smaller and of less value in poorer neighborhoods. What if we just said, you know what, no millage for you. We're just not going to tax you. But like the $1 million and the $5 million houses, we're going to tax them more, right? Like let's make them pay like a 20% property tax. And then people who can't pay, who don't really have the ability to pay, let's not tax them. We're not allowed to do that because of state law. So there's the uniformity clause. We have to, like, most of our revenue comes from what we're allowed to tax by the state. We're only allowed to tax property. But then also they're like, oh, but not only that, you can only tax everybody exactly the same. That's actually not very equitable because the poorer households and the households with smaller incomes are going to feel that harder, right? So, and are at risk of losing the houses if they even own a house, or will be paying higher rent because the landlord is passing it through. So, you have to think about equity from like how we get our money. And then, okay, we've got this pot of money, which is actually not small. This year's operating budget is $660 million proposed, right? That's a lot. That pays for people's salaries, pays for them to have like a desk in an office and kind of keeps the lights on. It's literally just the cash that we're going to spend this year on having like our 3,300 employees. I think we could do a better job at even the operating budget on equity, right? Paving is something that people usually notice and say like, whoa, why does this neighborhood have nice streets and that neighborhood does not? But even more than that, right? Are we serving our residents equally in the parks that we're providing, in the like children, youth, like recreation programming, which we basically have none of. And we used to. Before bankruptcy, we actually did a lot more programming where there might have been a recreation center in your neighborhood that actually had counselors there every day after school. I've talked to people who are in their 60s who said that like their city rec center with the city employees saved their lives because home wasn't safe. And so they just went to the rec center every day. And we don't do that. Those rec centers are mostly closed and not staffed, right? They might be open a little bit. Kind of similarly to the way that we do staff senior centers, because we know that our senior population, a lot of them are vulnerable. A lot of them don't have the income. They might actually be food insecure. And, you can go to the senior center if you're a senior and get a 50-cent meal. But you can't do that if you're a mom with little kids. I don't think that's right. Right? I think we could be doing a lot better, even in looking and saying, what are we doing operationally? Let's not assume it's still 1975. This is 2022. Where are the people that need our support? And what are the kinds of things we have as tools in the city to do them? I keep a really crumpled up piece of paper in front of me. It's nearby in a bag, but I'm not going to dig out and show it to you. But it's really, really, it's like I wrote it out in like 2017 after reading the Femisphere report. Which is I recommend to anybody, and I've shared the link to it. It's produced by Rochelle Jackson for the Women and Girls Foundation, because they did such a good job in that report identifying, like looking at this city through a gendered and intersectional lens, and identifying that our neediest citizens, 70% of those households are female-headed households with children. It maps out what neighborhoods they're in. It says that their cost pressures are not only housing. Housing is huge. Of course, we want people to have secure housing. But right up against that is food security. And right up against that is childcare costs. And right up against that one is like kind of transportation to like get to jobs or get the things that you need to live on a daily basis, as well as utility pressures. And I've literally like kind of wrote this down. And then I thought to myself, like, okay, so for each of those things, what is within the city capacity? Right. So like when I sat on the board of PWSA, we had to raise rates because that water system was collapsing and people had lead water service lines. So I helped push through with advocates, with Pittsburgh United and our water campaign were fantastic partners. A customer assistance plan, because we'd never had one. Right. And so now, again, we should be adjusting what you have to pay according to your ability to pay, right? And so people can get a discount, even though those rates had to go up. And the people who can pay, are paying full rate. And we've replaced more than half the lead service lines in the city. rebuilding the water system. We fought off privatization, which is another challenge for the city. Um, and I'd like to remind people that we also, again, am kind of looking at like, okay, so what is within our power? Like when you have a decision to make, okay, we have to start replacing these lead lines, right? We got to, the state has ordered us to do it. Let's do it. We fought with the state until they let us pay for the whole line and not just half the line. And then we targeted the lowest income neighborhoods that had the highest amount of children first. Because if we eventually stop paying to replace the whole line, at least, we will have replaced the households who can't afford to do it themselves, have gotten their free lead line. So I think that's been really, really important work, but you have to keep it in front of you every time. So it's hard to try to get us all, we have to get, you don't really have to get in 5 votes to push these things through out of 9, sometimes 6 if we need to get a super majority, but it can be done.
You talk about, things that can be done, like with city council. You mentioned earlier how important the budgets are, and that is, I think, what people most know about city council is the budget process. But a part of also that is the regulatory powers that come for the city, and with that, you're working with the mayor's office. What do you view as what the relationship should be between city council and the mayor's office? Because you're 2 separate, entities, but really you have to work together to get things accomplished for the city.
That's a really great question. Again, I feel like these answers are so wonky because it's just not the kind of thing you hear about on the evening news or that you're seeing in the ads on, your social media that are all like kind of like federal issues and state issues and like, kind of hot button issues. These are seeming a little wonky, but they have such an impact on what is the city that we are building, like who we are as a city and what we really, whose city it will be. I think it's important to keep in front of us kind of also who benefits and who pays from these kinds of decisions, right? Because we just want to make sure we ask the question so that we're all okay with the answer. And when you say regulatory powers, it's true. Like you can't build a house in the city of Pittsburgh unless you get a permit. You can't, and that's a really tough regulatory thing. I could put somewhere on my screen, I could flip screen and show you the actual map through all of the permit desks that you need to go through in order to get your okay, go ahead and start construction. It's pretty insane. It's like this giant messy chart. And the same is true for small businesses. You can't start your business unless you get through that regulatory, all of those permit desks in the right order with the money to pay for all those permits. And that is something I think that I'm glad to see Mayor Gainey is investing in. So the proposed budget has a lot more money for the planning desk and for the building inspection, or what's now called permits, licenses, and inspections. Because I think when we didn't have enough people in those departments, there was an unexpected consequence, a negative unexpected consequence, that only the people with architects and engineers and legal real estate attorneys could walk in there and actually get through the whole process. The process itself was discriminatory. It is exactly what we talk about when we talk about structural racism or structural sexism. The way we structured the requirements were prohibitive. So when you see that, gosh, why don't we have as many family businesses? Why don't we have as many minority businesses? Why don't we have as many women-owned businesses? Why don't we have businesses in these neighborhoods and not those neighborhoods where it's less profitable or more profitable? It's because really it took big guns. Like you had to have tons of resources, financial and all of the experts, just to be allowed to do something. And I really hope that working with the Gainey administration, we will change that. I really kind of had this hypothetical question to myself. And I had some interns work on it at one point. We didn't get very far. It's really hard to sleuth this work out sometimes, or to do the empirical research. But it was like, is PLI sexist and racist by its structure, right? Like, prove me wrong or prove me right, but like, let's try to find the data. And I really hope that we're getting there in that conversation. Other kinds of regulatory powers are unfortunately not as robust as we wish they were. Counties get to do things that the city of Pittsburgh doesn't, which is why sometimes we see the work that they can do in Philadelphia. It's so frustrating that we're not allowed to do that, either because the state has special allowances for Philadelphia that they don't have for Pittsburgh, or because Philadelphia is itself merged with its county, and so it has county powers. So that's frustrating. A lot of times with around air, around health issues, right? All of those kinds of permitting layers are at Allegheny County, and we can't, go out and issue a fine to an air polluter because we're just literally not. It's not our jurisdiction. We don't have that power. So did that answer your question? Was that your question?
It did.
Thanks.
I appreciate that because I think a lot of times people try to learn about local governance and it's a little bit overwhelming. And I think you're breaking it down in ways that people can, really understand some of the limitations, but like how it helps to have relationships so that things can change. And I know you were talking a little bit about the difference in powers, and we really just last week you were meeting with the Dignity Act Collective to talk about like legislation that would allow for a plethora of changes for women, particularly women, but also gender expansive people, to be treated with dignity while incarcerated, to include sanitary, access. And so, why was that so important for you to have that conversation? And how do you go about building relationships with a lot of these neighborhood groups so that you're able to amplify situations even if council can't act on them?
Sure, sure. Well, again, we're in our neighborhoods all the time, right? We go to their community meetings. I set up regular kind of phone call check-in times. Like if we need it that month, we need it. If we don't, we don't. As well as kind of going, and I like to sometimes just go ahead and put on my work gloves and just work alongside of my constituents. So I've been doing work on community gardens because it's just one of the things that I've noticed. Like I have so many gardeners and community gardens in my district, and it's an awesome thing, right? And sometimes it's nice to do something proactive that's not policy necessarily, although there's some policy that we've been working on to go with it, but to just kind of be there, kind of elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder with people. And I'm thinking about one of the Polish Hill residents that I worked with there, Etta, who brought this forward to me. And so I'm really grateful because, again, it's not anything that city council would necessarily have its eyes on, that women are denied basic human rights while incarcerated, because we don't oversee the jails. We have no power over the jails and what they do. It's a county function here, and it's a state function as well. And so it's disturbing but illuminating, and I'm really grateful for my constituents to bringing it forward to me. And so the thing that we could do is speak unanimously as a city council body to send a message to the powers that can do something about this, right? So it's official. It's an official letter that was sent to both the governor's desk and the state senate, to officially from Pittsburgh City Council, to say, hey, we want you as the unanimously, thank you to my colleagues for voting unanimously, to support HB 1419 to protect women who are incarcerated and provide them dignity and basic human rights to have their kind of menstrual products, to have especially not be shackled while delivering children in pregnancy. It's really frightening, and I really am grateful that they brought this to our attention, and hopefully amplified it also to public attention. Right, a lot of times when you bring something into chambers, you're talking about it on the record and permanent legislative record, and it'll get media attention and it'll get more social attention. So we can all collectively provide social pressure.
And thank you so much for that. It's very busy. we have election on Tuesday. They know that people have been out, this weekend. As we wrap up, what do you hope people take away about City Council, and how can people get in contact with you? I know you said that you have a lot of people already talking to you and engaging, but we know more people are moving in, into the district. How can people get in contact with you, and where can they find you?
Absolutely. We have social media feeds. I have personal ones that I use, but District 7 is usually the tagline that we use for Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. I think there's actually even a TikTok District 7 out there that only has a couple of videos. We had this really fabulous 22-year-old employee who since left us and went to DC to get a great job. And then you can always go to the city website and find the kind of page for your city council person, and find their social media links or direct emails there. We all have phone numbers. Mine is 412-255-2140. We have staff that check the voicemails and get back to you if they don't pick up the phone right away. And I like to tell people, because you need to stretch your mind sometimes about thinking about what is possible. So in thinking about working with city council, I like to say people pretend that this is a cooperative, right? Like an employee cooperative and a housing cooperative and a purchasing cooperative, right? And then what would you do? How would you structure the governance? What would you kind of spend money on? Because it kind of is, right? There's 300,000 of us. That's a lot. But, we can break it down into smaller pieces, and that's what we do. We're putting our money into a pot, and we're figuring out, sure, there's limitations what we can spend it on or not spend it on, but we're basically putting it together so that we can all have things together, like fire protection and garbage collection. Maybe we decide tomorrow that we have no more garbage and we don't need garbage collection. I'm not saying anything, DPW, I love you, environmental services, but that's, just magically, what if garbage just went away one day? We could spend that, 60 million, 80 million, I think it is maybe in the budget. What else would we spend it on? So it's a good mental exercise to think of what would we do with a pot of money if we were like a cooperative government?
Thank you. And our last question, what is bringing you joy? We know there's a lot of stuff happening, and you talked about some things in District 7, but what is bringing you joy?
Yeah, so it's true. It's been really nice trying to support more collective farming across the city. We have land. We have people who are amazing farmers. I've worked a little bit with Bugs, the Black Urban Garden Collective, and I've worked with, visiting garden sites around the city, but mostly in my own district. I think we have a lot of potential to invest in our local food system. That means growing food, but not only growing food, also the kind of making and distribution of food, creating small entrepreneurs who can kind of help bolster our resilience and what people like to call food sovereignty. It's we could do that. We used to have our own small dairies and also small bottling companies and our local food production. Almost all of those employ local people. Almost all of those kind of keep the wealth local. So it's a matter of health, and kind of planetary health, but also creating local wealth, but also local systems. And that just is nice and proactive, and it feels good.
All right, Councilwoman Deb Gross, thank you so much for sitting down with us. I hope you enjoy the rest of it.
Thank you so much. Nice spending time with you.
And that has been this week's edition of the Sunday Night Sit Down. I hope you learned a lot about city governance and why it's important to get involved. As a reminder, like we said, Tuesday's election day. Please make sure you have your voter plan. If you have not dropped off your ballot, you need to drop it off in person at the Board of Elections office. It's going to be too late to drop it in the mail. Your ballot has to be at the Board of Elections office by 8 p.m. to be counted. So please make sure you drop it off in person. I'm your host, Miracle Jones. I hope you have a wonderful week. We'll see you next Sunday for our next edition of the Sunday Night Sit Down. Have a great evening.